there, if you'll do it, and look at them in faith, and look at them in believing, that the things of earth will go strangely dim. And what a blessing for us to learn this week. Heavenly Father, Lord, I ask you now to come before you on this wonderful day that you have provided for us. This is a day which you have made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Lord, you know that we need the rain. You know that we, Lord, bring everybody to safety this morning. We pray that there's safety in everybody getting here. And Lord, thank you for everybody being faithful to these Sunday school classes and learning. And Lord, maybe not even be able to apply everything right now, but Lord, taking these things and doing their best to please you with their finances. And Lord, we've seen it just in the giving offering last week. What a blessing, Lord, the sacrificial giving of your people. We're so very thankful for it. May you just continue to bless our church. Bless this time we have to learn from your word and from practical knowledge and gather these things together. Let us have wisdom this week. And Lord, we ask you for it. In your name I pray. Amen. You can be seated there. We'll turn it right over to Brother Dwayne this morning. And this will be the final week of Brother Dwayne's Sunday school class. We've done, I think it was the last week of September and then the month of October here. And it might be an annual thing, might be a semi-annual thing, not quite sure yet. But I'm so thankful for the practical knowledge that we've gathered from these lessons. And you have two 70th Street for this morning, man. You are front and center, and we get to use those. So we'll turn it over to those.
Yes, sir. I do want to thank the pastor for the opportunity he has given me to speak and to share these things that I've learned over the years. And one of the things that I'm hoping is to, they said the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, that perhaps maybe these things, the lessons I learned the hard way, have been a help to you. Very simply, we're trying to take you to maybe that you were simple in some things to make you wise. But now the question is, are you going to take that wisdom and is it just going to be knowledge, or are you going to make it wisdom in your life? And that's a choice that you'll come to. Knowledge is accumulation of facts, accumulation of things, but wisdom is when you take that knowledge and put it into action. And so I hope these lessons have been a help to you. I do have a sign-up sheet. If perhaps you missed a week, I'll be more than glad to give you the PowerPoint. And there's no charge for that. If you need them, just ask that you'll use it. And so that's why I didn't just give out lessons or handouts for everybody. But if there's specifically one that you missed, then we want to go ahead and help you. This week we're going to look at setting your house in order and planning for the future. Not only getting out of debt, which is the short-term goal, but ultimately long-term, and setting our house in order. There's a verse here in 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 1. It says, "In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. And the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live." If you're familiar with this passage and with this story, the prophet Isaiah came to Hezekiah and said, hey, he had been sick, and the Lord said, hey, set your house in order, for tonight thy soul will be required of thee. And we know that in this story, King Hezekiah actually pleaded and begged with the Lord, and the Lord granted him additional 15 years. But we see the principle that was established by God himself about having our house in order. Because the only difference between King Hezekiah and you and I is that King Hezekiah knew the time that he was going to be called into heaven. You and I do not know that time. You might be sitting back there saying, hey, I'm in my 20s, I'm in my 30s, I got lots of time. Can I submit to you that you do not know that time when the Lord has appointed us? As the pastor as many times says, it's appointed unto man once to die, and then after that the judgment. You know, one of the things that as an attorney I've seen many tragic things. Just thinking about this past week, of people who perhaps thought they had a long time in their life, and their life was snuffed away. I was thinking of this past week, this gentleman I represented, he was going home after church on his motorcycle here in this area. Just a beautiful Sunday afternoon, went up over the knoll of a hill, and the car pulled right up in front of him, and he was killed. And only 50 years old, going home from church, and yet his life was taken like that. We all know that our life is but a vapor that appeareth for a little while and then vanish. So we see this principle of setting our house in order, and I'm going to go through this first part of this fairly quickly because I want to really get into talking about some of the legal things. You know, we need to set our house in order spiritually. What I mean by that is not only making sure of our salvation, but of our spouse and our children. Have you specifically asked your children that question? If they were to die today, are they 100% sure they're going to heaven? Have you specifically asked that question? You know, for my wife, I've asked that question, and she'll give the testimony that she was saved at Grace Bible Camp, and someone that was a worker there from Washington Bible College took and showed her how to be saved. Is there something that you can go back to that specific time in setting our house in order spiritually and making sure that we are the example that we are leaving? And here in 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 9, it says that we are to make ourselves an example, which means an example for those that are following behind us. But not only spiritually, but that's what with the last 5 weeks we've been trying to do is set your homes in order financially, getting out of debt, getting out of the bondage of debt. Stop living on credit and just being so driven by monthly payments and the weight of the debt that's underneath us. Giving God what is rightfully His and being properly insured. Not only setting our house in order spiritually, financially, but even emotionally, equipping our families on how to deal with their emotions. And that's really what we did back in April when we talk about, are you out of your mind? How to control our emotions by controlling our thoughts. You know, many times, even as parents, I put into here that first bullet point about being a problem solver. A lot of times, you know, we come in there and try to help our children or perhaps our grandchildren in that situation and resolve it for them, but perhaps we need to teach them to be problem solvers, how they can address the problem and correct it themselves. But here today, I want to focus upon setting our homes in order legally. You know, one of the first things, we're basically going to just talk about 3 documents here this morning that are important. One of the first things we're going to talk about is, in setting our house in order legally, is have a will or a trust. You say, well, why do I need a will? You know, I'm young, or I don't have anything. A will is an important thing that we have. I have an example here of kind of the ones that we do in our office. This is what I call a Christian will. You say, well, what makes it a Christian? Well, one of the things I do for those I know that are believers is in that very first paragraph, I have a profession of your faith in Jesus Christ. So that anyone that would come behind you and reads that, any of your children or relatives, they know of your testimony in Jesus Christ. When someone actually dies, what we do is we take that will and it's put up on record up at the courthouse in what that's called the Register of Wills or probate. And if anyone wanted to come and see, hey, what did Richie do with all of his millions, you know, and they can go and up there and see, you know, not only what he did with all his millions, but they can see his testimony in Jesus Christ. So why do we need to have a will? You know, what is the purpose? You know, a lot of people says, well, what happens if I die without a will? Some people think, well, it just all goes to the state of Pennsylvania. That's not true. What happens is we have what's called intestacy laws. Those are laws that dictate what happens if you die. But you may not want to go in the order in which the law says. Like in Pennsylvania, if you're married and have children, you die, what happens to your properties? Anyone know? Goes to your wife or your spouse. You're partly true. Only a portion goes to your spouse, but a portion goes to your children, even if they're minors. You've got to set up accounts. And for me, hey, I want to make sure everything is going to my wife, and then she can direct it, especially if she's still at home and got taken care of Noah or something like that. So maybe I don't want that to happen in my situation. Another thing that most people don't know, let's say you die, you've got a spouse, but you don't have any children. But you have a parent that's alive. Under the intestacy laws, a portion goes to the spouse and a portion goes to the parent. And a lot of people don't understand that. So you want to make sure you have a will so it's going to wherever you want. It stands, number one, as your wishes and desires. Number two is if you have children, you name a guardian for your children. I said this before, and I'll say it again, and I know this is going over the internet, so I'm not sure if any of my family will see this or not, but I'm the last of 9 kids, and I love all my brothers and sisters, and they all know Jesus Christ as their Savior and have made profession of faith, but there's some of my siblings I would not want raising my children. I love them dearly, but it's just like, okay, I don't want them raising my kids. And so, instead of it being a court battle, who's going to raise them, who's going to take care of the money that's going to be there for them, you can specifically name that. And name the pastor. Everyone just name the pastor in there as a guardian. He says, send your children over, no problem. His house is full. Yes.
My wife and I figured out the other day, we're godparents, and in people's wills, if everybody died at the same time, we'd have 17 children in our house. So
wow.
we're really praying there's not some kind of disaster.
Yes. No zombie apocalypse or anything happen. They'll all be coming to your house. The other thing, I already talked about your statement of faith. The other thing I put in here is don't forget about God. One of the things, working in this area, I deal with a lot of other religions. And, I'll just be specific, a lot of the Catholic people that I represent kind of put us to shame because they'll specifically name the church and leave something to the church. And that's one of the things I think we should because, if you look in Proverbs chapter 3, it talks about, honor the Lord with the substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. We all know what the first fruits of the increase, that's our income. But when it talks about the substance, that means our possessions. And I think that's one of the ways we can honor the Lord is just not forgetting about giving to the church and His work and His ministry if something should happen. Another question that comes up there is you'll see here the bequest to a child living riotously. Do I want my monies going to a wayward child? Am I now being an enabler by letting that money go to a child that perhaps has lived a riotous living? I was confronted with this past week. A Christian couple was in my office and asked that question. And, I remember a couple years ago, I speak out each year at a missionary candidate school, and this issue came up because I'll offer to missionaries and those that are in full-time service. I'll do wills and powers of attorney at no charge because it's just a way of giving back. But this missionary was concerned that they had one child that was living a riotous life. And what we did is in that will is we set up the money that was going to go to that one specific child to go to a pastor back here in the state to be held for that child's use and benefit if that child proved that perhaps maybe she got right with the Lord or surrendered herself to the Lord. And so, because they were concerning, they didn't want just this money going to that child and somehow using that to have the child be an enabler of that lifestyle. So that's one of the things that you can always question. You can make provisions in there. Maybe instead of going directly to them, you have it going to somebody else to be held in trust for that individual. That's a way of, again, being good stewards of that which you've entrusted. Richie?
Well, the house that my wife and I just purchased in March, if I was to pass away, she has a life insurance policy on me to where it would take care of the bills. But if we didn't have a will, would she be able to keep the house?
Well, is it in both your names? Okay, yeah, if it's in both your names, what happens is by operational law, it goes from you to your wife. And that's one of the things it's really interesting in the law is because a lot of our laws are based upon Judeo-Christian ethics and roles. When you own property as husband and wives, that's unique. Unlike if Richie, you and I own property here, we would own it 50-50, but if I die, then my 50% goes to my heirs. But when you own that property with Katie, it's viewed in the eyes of the law. It's called tenants by the entireties. You own it 100%. She owns it 100%. It is not divisible. And so upon your death, it automatically goes to her. That's why if sometimes people ask me, should I put the property in both names? I always suggest that because this actually provides protection. Let's say you're involved in a car accident, somebody sues you. They could not attach that house because your wife owns it 100%. Now, the property you and I own 50-50, they would be able to attach that 50%. So that's another way of making sure it goes to whoever you want. Deb?
What if you're speaking about children and stuff? What if your children are all grown?
Well,
Like I have 3 children.
right.
They're just going to get an equal portion.
Right. Yeah, you can name them as your children. I mean, I have somebody this past week, it's a good Christian couple. They have 50% going to their 2 children and 50% going to the church and then multiple charities. You know, it's again, you know, you have to ask the Lord, what do you want to have happen to this money? Now, I've already told my children, you know, being the last of the 9 kids, you know, working and the Lord's blessed me with these things. I said, don't plan on having a big inheritance, okay, Mitch? You know, I'm planning on spending that money, you know. You know, it's going to be gone, so don't start counting the chickens there, you know. But, you know, some people say, you know, they feel obligated to leave your children. And that's what you feel. One of the verses I put here, and you'll see there, Proverbs 13:22. It says that the honorable man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. That a lot of times maybe you can be a blessing to your children's children, to being your grandchildren. That's a verse in the Bible, Proverbs 13:22, if you want to look that up.
Well, that's like with my mother. It's up to us to provide for our children.
Right.
Just like our children, it'll be up to them to provide for their children.
Right. Yep. And that's the norm. But as I said, you know, there might be, the Lord lays upon your heart. Again, somebody might have a child that's living a riotous living. You don't want to enable that lifestyle. Maybe the Lord's kind of laid upon your heart that, yeah, a portion goes to the children, a portion goes to these ministries, or a portion goes to your favorite attorney. Not that I'm suggesting that, you know, just kind of throwing that out there. Kelly, you feel led of the Lord. That's right. Now, what in the world? Why did he say that? Can't believe that. So we move on. You know, there also are things called will substitutes. You got to keep this in mind. A lot of people have the misconception, okay, I have a will, so everything I own is going to go through that will. There are 2 categories of things that go outside the will. That one is jointly owned property, just like in the example of what Richie said about his house. Him and his wife own that, so even without the will, it's automatically going to go to them. I see a lot of times parents will, once they get older in life, they'll put their children's name on their checking account so that if something happens, they can write that. That's fine, but keep in mind, if you add your child's name to that checking account, it doesn't now go through your will. It's going to go to that one particular child that you named as a beneficiary. The second category is named beneficiaries, things such as life insurance, annuities, 401k. Anything where you have a named beneficiary, that's going to bypass the will and go directly to that person. So you got to make sure, who do I have listed as a beneficiary? Do I have my favorite attorney listed there? Again, not that I'm suggesting. I'm just throwing that idea out there as a suggestion. Patty?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question real quick. Now, with our life insurance and stuff like that, I have bill 100%, my children 50-50 if something happens to them or both of us together.
Right.
What would happen with the house if something happened to me and Bill both together? Would it go to the children?
Do you have a will?
No.
Shame, 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 shame. If in your circumstance, okay, because both your parents are passed away, then it would go to the children. You know, but then, you know, there's another issue there is within the will, naming the executor. Who's going to be the one in charge of administrating your estate? You can name that person. You know, one person might be better with the finances than any other person. So that's another reason to have a will. The other thing is, too, is we typically don't get involved in our wills, like specific assets, like, hey, you're going to get Aunt B's ruby ring, and you're going to get, you know, my 16-gauge shotgun that was Grandpap's. We typically don't name that in a will, but that's something you can do yourself. You can write on a piece of paper and say, hey, I want so-and-so to get this shotgun and this person to get that, as long as you sign and date it at the end thereof, it's valid in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the few states that recognizes what we call holographic will. You can sit down right now, take a piece of paper here and say, hey, I leave everything to my favorite attorney, Dwayne Ross. Again, not that I'm suggesting that, but just throwing that out there as a possibility. You sign and date it at the end thereof. That's valid and enforceable in Pennsylvania. One time I had, this is the weirdest thing I ever probated, is there's this two brothers. The one owned a junkyard, and the other brother, he was claiming the tools were left to him. And I said, well, what proof do you have of that? He brought in a receipt that was about this big, signed by his brother, say, hey, I give all my tools at the shop to my brother. He signed and dated, and I probated that piece of paper. So the will doesn't have to be necessarily official looking, but we do those things to help provide for that. Clayton.
Can you take, we sponsor a child through compassion, can you take and designate for her rest of her life and her education?
You can. I mean, if you're going through an agency, typically you'll name that agency as the beneficiary. You can say that agency in trust for that particular child. Sometimes, especially if they're out there in the third world countries, it's very difficult to name somebody in order to get that money to them. So you're better off naming that agency in trust for that child.
Should you have a pastor go through the agency?
Well, you could do one or the other. You wouldn't name the pastor and the agency. You would either use the pastor saying, hey, that person's holding it in trust for another person, or you would use that agency. One or the other. Michelle?
Like, say, I'm so bad at finances and stuff, but say, like, once me and Tim are married, and we don't have a will, obviously, we're young, and one of us dies, does the money go to parents, or does the money go to
Well, first of all, it depends upon where you're going to live. You know, where you live dictates what state. If you're living here in Pennsylvania, it will go to, if he has a parent that's alive, let's say you die first, actually some will go to Tim, some will go to your parents, unless you have a will saying everything goes to him. So you got to have a will if you want to do something other than what the intestacy laws. All states have intestacy laws. It's just there's a little bit different on each of them. You know, even dealing with these other categories, the named beneficiaries. One of the few things, in Pennsylvania, we have an inheritance tax. That means you pay a tax, when you get money from a property, unless it's between spouses, there's no inheritance tax. But anything going from a parent to a child, that's 4.5%. Anything going to a sibling, if you have going to your brother or sister, they pay 12%. And anyone else in the world is 15%. One of the few things that's not taxable is life insurance. Some of the states don't have it. I deal with a lot of times with clients that live half the year up here, half the year down in Florida. So a lot of times I'm telling them as an estate planning thing, why don't you consider Florida to be your domicile? Get your driver's license, voter registration down there. Consider that your main home because Florida does not have any inheritance tax. So let's talk about a couple of these other things. Not only set your house in order with regard to a will, a health care directive, and I'm just going to touch on these real quick. What is a health care directive? That's where you name somebody. This is now, I'm talking more particularly with the older people here. A health care directive, you name a health care agent to act and to make the medical decisions for you in the event that you were unable to do so. While you're still capable, competent, your word trumps that document, but let's say you don't, and you can have this health care directive. This is kind of what one of the ones that we use here. You name an actual healthcare agent, and what happens is you usually give this to your doctor, a medical provider. So if something happens, you're not able to make those decisions, then the healthcare stands, hey, this is my agent, my child, my oldest child, and my friend, whoever, to make those decisions. As long as you're 18 of sound mind, you can make that. There's even a provision that we put in there in the healthcare directive called a living will. That's a living will is basically upon two conditions: that A, you're in a terminable condition. That means that you have 6 months or less to live. And then the second thing, that you're incompetent or incapable of making those decisions. Then within this healthcare directive, you're going to say, I do or do not want this type of treatment. For me, I don't want to be prolonged upon life. One of the things, and I'll tell you from my own personal experience, with my father getting cancer, he was diagnosed at 59 and passed away almost a year later at age 60. But when it came down to those last few months, there was 9 kids plus my mom. There could have been 10 different opinions of what we're going to do with Dad. Are we going to do a DNR, do not resuscitate order? Or are we going to do more chemo? Are we going to do, what if his heart stops? Fortunately, we were all of the same mindset. We knew Dad loved the Lord, and he had his home in heaven, so we're of the consensus. But even making that decision is tough. And so if you have a healthcare directive and you've already dictated, hey, I don't want this heroic type of measures, it takes the pressure off the family, stands as your wishes and desires. And if you want, we had here David Gibbs III, who was one of the attorneys that represented the parents in the Terry Schiavo case. Remember the Terry Schiavo case, where there's a battle between the parents that wanted to keep her on life supports and the husband wanted to take her off? One of the things, they were unsuccessful in that area. Had she just had a living will or a healthcare directive, it would have taken that whole thing out of court. There would not have been a court battle. There would not have been the tens of thousands of dollars spent in that had she just had a healthcare directive. So that stands as your wishes and desires. Something closely akin to this, another area is, I'm just going to kind of rush through here a little bit, is also having a power of attorney. A power of attorney, again, I'm focusing more on the older people or those that are single or widow or widowers. A power of attorney is kind of like a healthcare agent, but instead of making medical decisions, they're making decisions regard to your finances and paying your bills and those type of things. You may, God forbid, have a sudden illness, a stroke, a heart attack, not able to pay your bills. Who's going to do that? If you just have a power of attorney, you have somebody there ready to step into your shoes and handle your affairs in the event that you would be unable to do so. This is really, I can't stress it for those that are widows or widowers, those that are single here, you really need to have this in place. Because, if something happens and you don't have one of these and you're not able to pay your bills, then we have to go through what's called a guardianship proceeding. Basically, we have to get your doctor to declare you incompetent. It's not only a tough thing to go through, but it's an expensive thing. We charge anywhere from $2,000 to $2,500 versus a power of attorney is $150.
Make sure that they realize the power of attorney is different than the power of medical.
That's right.
It's two different things. A lot of people think if you have power of attorney, you have power over the medical side too. It's not.
No, especially there's been a change in our law. We used to include under the power of attorney a provision, but now the law has said those two are separate. A power of attorney just deals with financial, healthcare directive, healthcare agent only deals with the medical decision. So those two are two separate things, two separate documents. But, having a power of attorney, I can't just emphasize enough of having this document. Especially we live in this world with the HIPAA laws and everything. They're just, you can't even get information. I remember one time, Kathy has a JCPenney card. And of course, I pay all the bills. I don't have a running balance. Sent in the payment. Next month, I got a statement saying there's a $35 late fee. I said, what? I pay all my bills and I pay them on time. So I got on the phone with them and said, here's the account number. And they said, who are we talking to? I said, Dwayne Ross. Can't talk with you. I said, what do you mean? I said, I'm Dwayne Ross. I'm the one that wrote out the check. It's my signature. You're not Kathy, can't speak to you. I'm her husband. I can speak to her. Our finances can't speak to her. I had to go and find her in a house, get authority from her to tell the operator that I could talk with her. And so, it's very difficult nowadays to get that information. So these are 3 very important documents to get your house in order legally. Debbie?
Is a living will the same as that medical directive?
You can have 2 separate documents called a living will and a healthcare directive. We've merged them into one document so that you have a healthcare agent name to make medical decisions, whether you're in a terminable condition or not. And also you have a living will that if you're in a terminable condition as declared by your doctor, this is the type of treatment that I do or do not want.
Because I have a living will, for you, but I don't remember that medical directive.
Well, it's something that has been progressed now, because of the change in the law with the power of attorney only dealing with finances and the healthcare directive being something else. They've made a change in that, so that's something we can look at even updating. We talked briefly about this last week. Also, having our house in order is having life insurance, particularly when your debt is high and you have children and you have a lot of responsibility. Again, I look at life insurance as income protection. Protection that, God forbid, if your spouse would pass away, you need that person's income replaced so that you can maintain your household and keep on paying your bills. And we looked at last week, just very briefly, looking at term, whole life, and universal life. Some people came up to me and said, hey, I was always told, you have a whole life policy because you have that for your lifetime. And that's what we've been told. But I'm trying to get you from the mindset of you got to have life insurance all the time to getting to the point where you're out of debt and you become self-insured, where you don't need that life insurance. If you haven't done that, well, one of the things that we talk about, even with the older people of estate planning, is making sure we got money set aside to take care of their funeral. You might have to have life insurance, or in the alternative, one of the things I tell people is have what's called an irrevocable burial fund. And what that is monies you put in the bank that you can't take out. It's specifically there for the funeral expenses, and that can take the place of life insurance. But, specifically for the young people, when your debts are high and you have young children, you need that person's income replaced. Term insurance is the cheapest way to go because you're just paying for the protection there in your house. Somebody asked me, well, what guideline do you go by? I usually say, take that person's average salary times 10. And, so if they're making $30,000 a year, take that times 10. That's $300,000 that you really need to have so that you're able to get through to that child reaches 18. And, with the permission of the Womacs, this is one of the things I remember when Pastor Womack was near unto death. He was ready to go. He knew the Lord and was confident in that, but one of the biggest things he was concerned about is leaving his wife and some teenagers at home. And nothing short of a miracle, God was able to get him insurance to provide some of these things, which is totally out of the norm. Once you've got a diagnosis of cancer or anything like that, it is very difficult to get insurance. That's why you want to do that when you're healthy. I put on there selectquote.com. It's an excellent site. They'll actually go out and go with 10 to 12 different companies, and they'll compete to get you the best rate out there. The thing you have to do is just make sure that that is a reputable company. I put on there, check with Moody's or Standard & Poor's to make sure that that company is either A- or above. You don't want to get into B-rated companies or C-rated companies because there have been some life insurance companies that have gone out of business. So if you get Schwinder Life Insurance Company, you might want to check into that first, and to see how good of a company that is. The other thing is I just want to really finish up on is talking about savings for the future. There's a biblical difference between saving versus hoarding. Saving has a specific purpose in mind. I'm saving for my retirement, or I called it the career change. I'm saving for my emergency fund. I'm saving to buy a car or to buy a house. That is, I believe, consistent with the scriptures, because it talks about, planning for the future. Which of you will build a house except for first sit down and count the cost? That's different from just hoarding money. I just want to get rich. I want to get as much as possible and more, and trying to just accumulate as much wealth as possible. Two of the things that we're talking about saving for the future is saving short term is the emergency fund. Again, only after you're out of debt, you should try to have an emergency fund there that if you were unable to work, you did something to your leg, while playing basketball or something really facetious like that, or fall off a ladder, you want to have your income replaced. You want to be able to have that source of income. Having an emergency fund is there. And again, remember, it is only for emergencies purposes. It's not like a vacation. I need a vacation, so it's an emergency. I got to have this. We want to hit that. No, it's there for emergencies, not for our wants. That's the short-term goal when you start talking about savings. When you're talking about long-term, we're talking about retirement. When you say, should I retire? This comes up a lot of times in questions, even with pastors and full-time Christian workers. They say, I'm never going to plan on retiring. I'm just going to preach, and hopefully I'm going to die in the pulpit. Well, I know of an individual and pastor right now who had to actually go out of the ministry because of the fact that he opted out of Social Security. He thought as a young pastor he was never going to need that. Well, now he's to the point where his health is failing, and because he's never paid into Social Security, he can't get it out of it. And so he's actually had to come out of the ministry and is working a secular job to pay into Social Security, so it's going to be eligible there for him and his family. So, even though we don't think of those things as retirement, it's something that God may put in our lives to do what I call a career change. And again, it's the philosophy, not that we sit around, eat, drink, and be merry, as we saw in Luke chapter 12 that rich man did. That was the wrong. But do something for the Lord. One of the things that pastors already mentioned and that I've shared with you before, I'm looking to that point where I can go and doing what I'm doing here full time, helping people to get them out of debt, get them, lift the blinders off their eyes of what the devil has done in this thing of debt and how he's deceived and how he has distracted us from what God has intended to use with our finances. And that's something that is really on my heart's desire, is to have a career change. Maybe I'll still do something with the law, maybe do some mediation work, perhaps even teach. That's another area. But those are things that we're not retiring from God, but we're doing something maybe full-time for the Lord. I thank the Lord for the prime timers that we got here and how many of you are involved in helping out with the Christian school here. I think that is fantastic. Clap, a round of applause, go at it. I'm excited for you, and I hope to see more people do that. What are we going to do? Save for retirement. Is that, first of all, you start off with these tax shelter things. When it says tax shelters, it just means that any interest or dividends that is earned in that, you don't pay income tax on that now. So it's growing faster for you, with the idea that once you take that money out, when you retire, then then that's when you pay the tax on that. I was going to show you the magic of compound interest, but I don't think she put that in there. Oh, okay, here it is. Let's say you had a goal. Let me just show you one quick thing. This is why you got to start when you're young. Let's say you had a goal of having $100,000 when you reach age 65. And I know this is an absurd interest rate, but let's go for go with the example here. Let's say you earn 12%. If you're 25 years of age, you have to start putting $10.21 away. What do you think it is when you get to 35? That's 10 years later. If you want to reach that same goal, having $100,000, but you don't start until you're 35. Double it, okay? At age 35, it's $32 a month. 3 times that. Because one of the things about the magic of compound interest is you're earning interest upon interest. Is it works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's making interest upon the interest. It's growing. So that's why it is so important to start early. What if you waited to age 45? How much do you think it's going to be? $100 a month. You're real close. $108. Again, just think if you were just putting $10 away now when you're 25 versus now I'm waiting. I'm going to wait till my children are gone, wait till this is gone. I'm waiting till 46. I have to put 100. Let's say you wait to age 55. It's $446 that you have to put away because you don't have as much time to use on that. If I can just, again, emphasize a couple things here is, it comes down to this. Remember, it's about a choice. I've tried to equip you here with a lot of information, and I hope I haven't overwhelmed you, but we're trying to make you from simple to wise in these areas. The question is, are you going to now take that knowledge and make it wisdom by apply it into your life? You say, well, maybe down the road. Well, by simply doing nothing, you are making a choice. You're making a choice that you're going to put this aside and you're not going to get yourself out of debt. You're going to continue to have the emotional stress. You're going to have the relational stress. You're going to have the economic stress. You're going to have the spiritual stress upon your life by not getting out of debt. I'm hoping, again, that you, through these lessons, have seen and that you've gotten mad, that you've gotten a righteous indignation toward the devil of distracting us and deceiving us with the world's philosophy on debt. It's, again, a choice. Financial stress. I just saw this. I got this past week. These statistics came across my desk in a magazine I had. Financial stress is the #1 cause of stress-related illnesses. 84% of employees report having some degree of financial stress, and 24% of the healthcare costs and people who are stressed about finances. And I even give the sites here. Again, if I could just say it this way, it's your choice. I hope that you'll use this information with the Holy Spirit's guidance and the Scripture's guidance and the guidance of godly counselors that God has put in your life to get out of debt, that you could be free at last. So one day, again, when you stand before the Lord, you can hear those words, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." If I could be of help to you in any way, don't hesitate to call me, even at the office. I'll be more than glad to provide these outlines and these PowerPoints so that they can be a help to you in the future.